Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. We continue with The Dark Frigate. Chapter 15. A Lonesome Little Town. A light seen in the middle, which gave warning of an unexpected landfall, and calling up the Old One, who had a store of knowledge gained by much cruising in those seas. They lay off and on until dawn, when they made out an island of the Bahamas. It seems, since by their reckoning they were still a day's sail from the land, that there was some small fault in their instruments. But to this they gave little heed, and which island it was and what occasioned the light they never knew, though some ventured one guess and some another as they bore past it and lifted isle beyond isle. For 2 days, when the Old One conning the ship, they worked their way among the islands, and thus at last they came to a deep bay set among hills, which offered a commodious and safe anchorage, notwithstanding that on the point that guarded the bay there was the wreckage of a tall ship. In the shallop they had taken from the old fishing pink, the Old One and Jacob, with 4 men to row them, went out to the wreck, and returned well pleased with what they had found. "God is good to us," cried the Old One, perceiving that Harry Malcolm waited at the waist for their coming. "Though her foremost and mainmast be sprung, yet her mizzen is sound as a nut." "And it is to be fetched out of her unharmed?" "Yea, that it is. Come, Master Carpenter, haul out our broken old stump of a mason. By this time on the morrow our good Rose of Devon will carry in its place as stout a stick as a man can wish. Faith, the ill fortune of them whose ship lies yonder shall serve us well." There was a great bustle in the old frigate, for work was to be done that needed many hands. Some went to the wreck to save masts and spars, and others, led by the one-eyed carpenter, toiled to haul out the stump. Boatswain Marsham and his mate laid ready ropes and canvas, and the most of the company being thus busied with one task or another, Martin and the cook caught a store of fresh fish, which the cook, who had now become a chastened, careful man, boiled for supper, while Martin went on shore for fruit that grew wild in abundance, and for fresh water from a sandy spring. It was 3 days instead of 1 before the work was finished, but meanwhile there was fresh food and water aft and forward, and having spent at sea many weary weeks, the men rejoiced to pass time so pleasantly in a snug haven. Indeed, a man might have passed a long time in comfort on such an island, and there were many who cried yea when Joseph Kirk declared himself for building a town there, to which they might return with a store of wine, and from which they could sally forth when their supplies of either got low, and get for themselves others out of the King of Spain's ships and plantations. But the Old One laughed and cried, "Nay, I shall show you a town," said he, "in a land as fair as this, but with houses built and ready for us, and with gold piled up with waiting, and with great cellars of wine and warehouses filled with food." So they sailed from the island one morning at dawn, and for a week they picked their way down the windward passage. At times they lay hidden in deep harbors on which the Old One knew the secret, and again they stood boldly out to sea and put behind them many leagues of their journeys. And thus progressing one night, as they worked south against a warm breeze, scented with the odor of flowers, they sighted on the horizon a dark, low land above which rose dimly the shape of a distant mountain. The men gathered about, master and mate, and Jacob and Harry Malcolm went swarming up the rigging, and from the main topsail yard studied the dim bulk of the mountain. After a time he cried down to them, "Douse all lights and hold her on her course." For an hour they stood toward the land, Then Malcolm came down from the aloft smiling, and there ran through the ship a great wave of talk. Though a man had never sailed those seas before, he would not have found the reason for their talk hard to guess, since there were few secrets on board. Time and distance had made less the grumbling occasioned by the disastrous brush with the porcupine and by the littleness of the profit got from the pink, and they had warmed their hearts with the old one's tales. Bearing to the west, the Rose of Devon skirted the dark shore for miles, but the master and mate were growing anxious lest dawn overtake them before they should reach the hiding place they sought, and when they rounded a certain wooded point and sailed into the deep, secluded bay where a ship might lay for a year unseen, which put an end to their fears, they let go their anchors with all good will and furled their sails, and at break of day they kedged the ship into a cove that might have been a dock, so straight were the shores and so deep the water. Mind you, Ned, or mind you, Hale, the night we landed on Hispaniola? The men from the Blue Frigate were saying, and 'twas thou at my side when we stole down through the palms and bottled the garrison in the little fort, and what wine we got that night! Yea, and how drunk we got, so that Martin Barwick was of a mind to go fight a duel with the captain of the soldiers, and then they burst out and drove us all away, and there was an end of our taking towns for a long while. I will have you know that I was no drunker than any man, Martin snarled, and they laughed uproariously. Come, cried another, since we have laid our ship in her chosen berth, let us sleep while the idlers watch. We shall be off in the cool of the afternoon, nay, in the morning. Afternoon or morning matters little, said old Jacob thickly, in the corner where he sat watching all the men. The hour is near when we shall lay in the hold a goodly cargo. I know well this town. We need only find 2 more such towns to get the money to keep us the rest of our lives, like so many dukes, each of us in a great house in England, with a park full of deer, and kitchens full of food. That day, while the men slept in such cool places as they could find, the cook and the carpenter stood watch, and a very good watch they kept, for they were prudent souls and feared the old one, and dared not steal a wink of sleep. But though there was much need that the men should sleep, there was small need of a watch, for the ship lay in that deep cove in the little round bay, with masses of palms on high banks, which hid her from waterline to trunk. At mid-afternoon, as the old one had bade them, the cook and the carpenter called the men, who came tumbling up, quickly awake and breathing heavily, since there was work to be done ere another morning broke, and like enough blood to be spilled. From a chest of arms Harry Malcolm handed out muskets and pistols of pikes. "This is for you," he said, "and this is for you, and here's a tall gun for Paul Craig. Nay, curse not. Prayers, Paul, shall profit thee more than curses. I tell you what, I'll not carry this great heavy gun," quoth he, and turned a dull red from anger. "Bulbabal," one cried, and all laughed. "'Tis lucky, Paul," retorted Harry Malcolm, "that Tom Jordan is an easy, merciful man, or that's more than one back would bear a merry pattern in welts, which a man must rest for firing," and handed it to another. "And this for you." Jacob was turning over and over on his palm powder from a newly opened barrel, and the old one was leaning on the quarter-deck rail, whence he sleepily watched the small groups that were all the time gathering and parting. Will Canty, his face a little whiter than ordinary, and his hand holding his forelock upright by the barrel, stood ill at ease by the forecastle. The boys lurked in the corners, keeping as much as possible out of the way, but watching with wide eyes the many preparations. And indeed it was a rare sight, for the staunch old ship, her rigging restored and her many leaks stopped, lay in her little cove, where a cool breeze stirred the ropes, and the afternoon sun shone through the palms brightly on the deck, and the men moved about bare-armed. "It would save much labor," said the carpenter, "were we to use this fair breeze to go by sea." "True, carpenter, but a ship coming in from the sea is an easy spied by night as by day, whereas a company of men descending from the hills by night will have the fort before the watchdog barks. And who is there will grudge labor in such a cause?" The old one looked about, and the carpenter himself nodded assent. Only Paul Craig grumbled, and at him the others laughed as they ate and drank. They slept again till they just before dawn, then running a plank to the shore, they gathered under the palms, for there was need of a last council before leaving the ship. "We are 40 men," said the old one, "and 40 men are all too few. But though it is little likely that any will stumble on the ship in our absence, it is a matter of only common prudence that we post a guard ere we go." "Yea, a guard," cried Paul Craig. "I now am a very watchful man. Nay, but think, Paul, how great a meal thou canst eat when thou hast climbed up hill and down with thy gun, and how much thou canst drink. 'Twould be no kindness to leave thee. We must leave some little supple lad, who hath no need for the tramp." And the old one chuckled. "Come, Paul and Martin, you shall lead our van." Harry Malcolm met his eye, and he nodded. "A name to guard our ship," said he. "The cook and Joe Kirk and Will Canty. Do you lads load the swivel guns, and keep always at hand 2 loaded muskets apiece. Fire not unless the need is urgent, and keep the ship with your lives, for who knows but the lives of us all are staked upon your watchfulness and courage. You, Harry, since you know best the road, shall lead, with Paul and Martin upon either hand. The rest shall follow, and Jacob and I will guard the rear." He turned to the 3 who were to stay. "If there is good news, I will send men to bring the ship round to the harbor where, God willing, we shall load her to the deck with yellow chinks. If bad news, why, you may see us in 1 day or 3 or 5, or maybe never." He arched his brows and tossed his piece to his shoulder, and with Jacob at his side he followed the others, who were already laboring under the weight of their weapons as they filed up the steep acclivity. The old one and Jacob slowly climbed the wild, rough hill and paused until the marching column was out of hearing. "You are a strange man," said Jacob. "I would wring his neck without a thought." "That were a mere brutal jest, such as affordeth little joy," the old one replied. "I will wind him in a tangle of his own working. Then I will take the breath from his nostrils deliberately, and he will know, when he dies, that I know what I know. You are a strange man. I can keep order among the gentlemen better than could any captain in the king's service, and such a game as this sharpens a man's wits. We shall see what we shall see." Jacob slipped away by himself, and the old one followed his men. All that morning, unseen and unsuspected, Jacob sat behind a rock within earshot of the ship. The palms shielded him and shaded him, and he got himself into such a corner that no one could approach him from behind or see him without being seen. All that morning he neither heard nor saw aught worthy of mark, until about noon a voice in the ship cried out, so that Jacob could plainly understand the words, "One should watch from land. Now a man on the hilltop could serve us well." To which a second voice replied, "Go thou up. Will go thou up? We are of no mind to stir." There came the sounds of steps on a plank. Then a rattle of pebbles and a rustle of leaves, and Jacob rose quickly and followed at a safe distance a man who passed his corner on the way up the acclivity. Reaching the summit of the hill, where he was safely out of sight from the ship, the fellow, and it was indeed Will Canty, searched the sea from the horizon to horizon. But Jacob, hunting deliberately, as was his manner, found a seat a great way off, yet so situated among the trees that he could watch without being seen. For an hour he sat thus in a niche in the rocks below and watched Will on the flat ledge above. Then he saw him start up a sudden and look round him very carefully and cautiously, and whip his shirt off his back and wave it in the air. For a good half an hour Will waved the shirt, stopping now and then to rest, but it seemed that nothing came of his waving, for with a sad face he put on his shirt and again sat down, and presently he returned to the ship. Jacob dozed a while longer where he was, having seen all that, for he was a man who could put two and two together, as well as another, and he had learned what he wished to know. Then he got up, and seeking out the place where the old one and his man had passed, he followed after them at a serious, steady gait, which seemed not very fast yet, which kept plodding so surely uphill and downhill, and through gullies and over ledges, and along beside the sea, that in 2 hours he had covered the distance the others, burdened with guns and pikes and swords, had covered in 3, and before nightfall, following the marks they had left for him, he overtook them resting in a ravine. Night, which comes so suddenly in the tropics, was about to darken the world, when Jacob gave them a great start by walking silently in upon them as they sat talking in low voices with their guns laying by their sides, and their minds on the work that was before them. He nodded at the old one, who knew well enough what his nod meant, and sat quietly down among them. There was but a small moon, and when at nearly midnight they bestirred themselves and ate the last of the sea bread they had brought, the light was dim, but their plans were laid, and the hour was come, and the old one and Harry, Malcolm, and Jacob knew the ways they were to go. They were more than 30, and they straggled out in a long line as they climbed the precipitous hill. But those ahead waited at the top for those behind, and together, marching in close array, they crossed a ridge and came into sight of a little town that lay below them among hills and mountains. It was a dark and silent town, whose houses had a ghostly pallor in the faint light from the crescent moon, and it lay beside a harbor which shone like silver. There were no lights in the house, and in all the place nothing stirred, but in the harbor a ship lay anchored, concerning which they speculated in whispers. "The road lies yonder under the rock," said Harry Malcolm, "and one man has strayed," Jacob whispered. "I will fetch him." He stepped back the way they had come, and returned with Paul Craig, who dragged his gun by the muzzle. The fellow's manner betrayed his cowardice, and the old one pushed the point of a knife against him. "If again you stray or loiter," he whispered, "this blade will rip you open like a hog fat for the killing." Though the words were uttered very softly, others heard them, and Martin Barwick, whose courage was none of the staunchest, rubbed his throat and swallowed hard. "Gold without stint is ours for the taking," said the old one. "I have a misliking of yonder ship. Nay, she is but one more prize." They moved down the mountain path towards the town. "There are 12 houses," said Jacob. 2 men to a house leave 10 for the fort." In the dim light he had missed his count, for the men, as they approached the gate of the village, had crowded together. "No one sleeps in the fort," quoted Harry Malcolm in a low voice. They go to the fort only when they are attacked by dogs of English or wicked pirates. Someone laughed softly. 2 men to a house, the old one was saying. Kill, plunder, and burn. Then as they stood in the very gate, a dog barked. They jumped at the sound, but higher by far did they jump, when from the ship laying in the harbor there came a loud hail in Spanish. Ha! The dogs are wakeful, the old one cried in double meaning, and with that he plunged forward through the shadows. Though for the most part he showed himself a shrewd, cautious man, he was not one to turn back when his blood was up, and quicker than thought he had raised his voice to a yell. Come, my hearts, and burn them in their beds. Nay, nay, cried Jacob, come back while there is yet time. They cannot yet know who we are or from whence we came. Another day, another month, will be best. But they had gone with a yell, and the old one had led the way, and they had followed at his heels. Jacob was left alone in the dark, and being a rarely prudent man of no mind to risk his neck lightly, he stayed there where he was. As the old one stormed the first house, there came a shot from the darkness, and he gave a howl of pain and rage. Turning, Phil Marsham saw a stranger cross the road behind him, but he had no time to consider the matter, since the first cries had waked the town. A dozen men were exchanging musket shots with the fort, wherein they were folly blind, for their shots went wild in the dark, and their guns took a long time loading. And the old one, thinking to further the attack, and not considering the light would reveal their whereabouts and their weakness, struck fire to dry grass, which blazed up and caught wood, but went out hissing under a bucket of water from within a house. Here a Rose of Devon's men took the steel and died, and there another went down, hit by a musket ball, in a lull in the firing, for the charges of their guns were soon spent. They heard plainly the sound of oars, and saw that 2 boats were bringing men from the vessel in the harbor, and from the far side of the place others came charging with pikes and swords. In all truth, the town was aroused, and the game was over. So they took to their heels and ran for their lives, since they were outnumbered and outfought, and no other course was left them. All who escaped gathered on the hill, for though a man might wish in his heart to leave the Rose of Devon forever, he could find no refuge in the nest of hornets they had stirred to fury, since in the eyes of the enemy one must appear as guilty as another. So, leaving 10 of their number behind them, dead or wounded or captured, every man who could walk started back for the Rose of Devon, with the thought to cheer him on, that after daybreak in all likelihood the howling pack would be at his heels. They bickered and wrangled and cursed, and one whispered to Phil Marsham that if they had had an abler captain their luck would turn, which was a great folly and cost him a broken head. That for thy prattle, the old one cried, for he had been walking just behind, and with a club he struck the fellow a blow that sent him to the ground. Indeed, the old one had intended to kill him, and had he not been so weary, he would doubtless have stayed to complete his work, for his temper was torn to rags. Uphill and down they went, through thickets and streams, over ledges and sandy slides, round dank old fallen logs, along firm beaches, back to their dark frigate, with their labor for their pains. And so, by broad daylight, weary and hungry and too angry for civil speech, they came to the Rose of Devon. The Yonkers trotted along, dog-tired, and the men trampled in as best they could. There were hard words on this side and hard words on that, and hands were clapped on knives for no cause at all. They thought it odd when, in the grey morning, they came sliding down to the ship with a rattle of pebbles and loose earth, that they found her so still, and only the cook on her deck, and himself in a cold sweat of fear. "I would have naught to do with it," he cried, and being still mindful of his thirsty hours in bilboes, he shook his shoes lest they fix upon him a share of the blame for that which had occurred in their absence. With what and whom wouldst thou have naught to do? The old one demanded, and he showed a face that made the cook's teeth rattle. With them, they're gone. Who hath gone? Will Canty and Joe Kirk. They took the shallop and bread and beer. It seems, said the old one, in a strangely quiet voice, that the edge that is nicked is not Will Canty's. Is it thine, Jacob, or mine? The cook thought that either he or the old one had lost his wits, for he made no sense of the words, but Harry Malcolm and Jacob knew what was meant, and Philip Marsham made a sharp guess at it. And we will continue our reading of the Dark Frigate next Friday or Saturday. And thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.